We have Paul Gallagher with us with EIRs from the Economics Department to discuss the concrete reality of what we're seeing in light of the present financial crash that everyone is hearing about regarding the Eurozone. Now, I think the way that I would like to premise this is that when looking at the unemployment figures inside the United States, which is what you will go into, is you're dealing with an administration, Barack Obama nominally, who is a killer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the foremost important thing for people to consider when they think about why there's a lack of response to the fact that you have an increasing number of people out there, predominantly I think younger is what you would go into to some extent, that are in a position where they're receiving no income, hence no security in regards to shelter, food, and anything that is just basic requirements for life. Now, I do bring this up again in light of the fact that we are living in the process of an explosion that's about to erupt in Europe. People have seen this in regards to the numerous bailouts that are being discussed for Spain, Italy, discussion of Ireland, and who knows what's next. And I think it's important to highlight what is the concrete reality or the repercussions that this would hit in the United States if we have a hyperinflationary blowout of the entire system. Now, what you're going through right now is something that's already been ongoing for many years to this point. And I think what the key thing to keep in mind is what would this mean further in a further collapse of the entire system that would impact the United States. So if you can go through some of the work you've done with the unemployment figures and what that means in relation to a collapse of Europe and also within the United States.
Well, recently, a few weeks ago, there was a report that came out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics here, which was universally called an extremely bad report, indicating nothing going on in the U.S. economy, no creation of jobs. Really, people should not focus on those monthly reports. They are extremely manipulated in terms of the figures you're hearing as opposed to the real figures underlying them. And that report was no worse than anything else that has been going on month after month and year after year, and in particular, really for the last more than a decade, but in particular with Obama in the White House. There has simply been a drastic ongoing shrinkage of the labor force in the United States, forced shrinkage. And what we mean by the labor force is anybody who has a job or is looking for one. And forced shrinkage means a forced abandonment of the attempt to get employment by more and more millions of people over the course of recent years, and in particular, young people. By that I mean anywhere from 16 up to roughly the age of 30. The younger cohorts of what should be the working population, the labor force, young people making no attempt to join the labor force, hiding in college, staying at their parents' house, taking care of their grandparents, whatever it is, in one way or another, unable to make the first step to productive employment in the labor force, and just never appearing in these so-called statistics at all because they just gave up before they started. And this is in the millions of people. So what we're looking at, we face a crash which is already underway throughout the European banking system. Bailouts, as you mentioned, are obviously on the agenda. These bailouts are going to be ineffective. They're going to be inadequate in size. They're going to be hyperinflationary in impact, and they're not going to save the banks there from coming down. So the question here, as that crash hits our economy, which it will do both in extreme inflationary pressure as the Federal Reserve is pulled into printing money for these bailouts, global bailouts anchored around the Federal Reserve printing money and the Bank of England printing money. So extreme inflationary pressure from that, and the participation of our banks in all the hedging operations and the derivative counterparty operations of these European mega banks, which will be taking our banks down. Is there any underlying physical economic strength in the U.S. economy that could withstand the shock of this crash coming at us from across the Atlantic? Or on the other hand, is this already a dead economy, not producing any jobs or producing only part-time and temporary jobs, which will be just swept away by this crash into huge mass unemployment and hyperinflation? That's really the question. And when you look at what's happened and the figures on what's happened, you see that the answer is the latter very clearly. In the decade already from 2000 to 2010, 2001 to 2010, 80% of the people who came of age or otherwise became eligible to enter the workforce didn't enter it. Unbelievable proportion. In the previous decade, it was 30% didn't enter the workforce. In that 10 years, it was 80%. 17 million people who either came into the United States and became eligible to work in that way, or reached the age of 16, became eligible to work in that way, got out of prison, became eligible to work in that way. 17 million of these people stayed outside the workforce, or if they tried to get into it, they dropped back out because they couldn't stay employed. 80%, that's an unbelievable forced shrinkage. Then in the 3 years that Obama has been president, the rate of shrinkage of the workforce has increased, if that were possible. 3 million people in 3 years have dropped out of the labor force. That is, working age eligible people between 16 and 65, not in any kind of institution, not in the military, people who should be ready to work unless, a certain fraction of them are in education. 3 million of them gave up, dropped out. 3 million more who became of age did not get into the labor force, gave up before trying, and the labor force, not surprisingly, the portion of people outside the labor force grew by 6 million in just those 3 years. That's 6 million wasted potential workers, employees, in just 3 years of the Obama administration. And then you look at the jobs that have been created. 2/3 of them, month after month, 2/3 of the jobs that are being talked about in these reports, these monthly reports, are low wage. What that means is that they are less than twice the poverty level of income. So if you're talking about an individual, the poverty level of income is $11,000. That means these are jobs earning less than $22,000 for the full year. If you're talking about a family of four, where the poverty level is $22,000 for two wage earners in a family of four, that means that those two wage earners are able to earn less than roughly $40,000, no more than that, in the course of a year. Try living on that with a family of four. This is 2/3 of all of the employment that is being created, that is being bragged about, or was by the president until recent months, until it collapsed. 2/3 of that employment is low wage. It's temp employment. It's part-time employment. It's not productive employment for the most part. Look at the construction sector and you see the answer right there. 2 million fewer people working in construction today than were working there 4 years ago. Not the slightest recovery from the collapse of 2007, 2008. Not a sign of life in construction employment in that entire 4-year period of time. Then if you look at younger people, they are, if they're between the ages of 18 and 25, this is everybody. This is not any minority, not any subgroup. Right. Between the ages of 18 and 25, almost 50% are not working full-time. A great number of them, as I mentioned, are kind of trying to hide in community colleges for 6 years at a time, if they can somehow afford it. Are living with their parents, are living with other relatives, are living with friends, are taking care of grandparents, and all they're getting for this is college debt, which they're unable to repay. And this is everybody knows that story and the way it's developing into a bubble because it's over $1 trillion, and almost 30% of it is in arrears, going into default. And if you take black young people, 18 to 29 years old, well over 50% of them are unable to work full time. So the only part of the population that has kept working has been the baby boomers, who are unable to retire because of their loss of their savings. As the Federal Reserve just acknowledged, 40% of the savings, of the wealth of the average family, disappeared in the last 4 years. So they have kept working, making it even harder for the young people to enter the workforce. It's a disastrous situation in which no employment is being created, but this low-income, part-time, temporary, in which people are working, but they have no idea how long they will be working, no idea what their hours and their income will be in coming weeks or months. And then you look at the unemployed. What we're seeing now is that just in the last 2 weeks, for example, the number of people who were in the early stages of receiving unemployment,
Last 2 weeks.
the last 2 weeks alone, number of people in the early stages, that is, they've been unemployed for less than 6 months, getting benefits from the states, those went up by about 40,000 in the last 2 weeks, but the total went down by nearly 200,000 in the last 2 weeks. So you have nearly a drop in 250,000 of people at the long end, people who've been unemployed for anywhere between 6 months and 2 years, and have been going through the various stages of extended federal unemployment. Probably 250,000 of them in 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks alone, lost the last remains of their unemployment benefit income. So they essentially have no income at all at this point. And we're now in a situation where out of 14 million officially unemployed people who are out there looking for work, only 5.5 of them are receiving, million of them are receiving any kind of benefit at all. The others are just living on whatever they can get, and whatever they saved, and whatever they can borrow. And millions of them have been living by not paying their mortgages, which has been, of course, famous and notorious in the last few years. So these people have lost all their purchasing power. They don't know where more purchasing power is coming from. They don't know where any productive or long-term prospect of employment is coming from. If you take that kind of an economy, which also is not employing in construction and not employing in manufacturing, you take that kind of an economy and hit it with a European bank collapse, which hits the U.S. banking system with shockwaves and also starts off Federal Reserve money printing in order to force inflation into the system, you're going to have a real disaster defined by real mass unemployment and by prices at a certain point suddenly taking off, so that you get real immiseration. But you have this underlying problem of the inability of demand to be generated by all of these, by this mass unemployment. I just noted, and this is quite notable, in the last week, the current owner of the Bethlehem Steel plant in Baltimore, once the biggest steel producer in the world with 35,000 employees, it's shrunk to 2,500, 3,000 already more than a decade ago, but it's been bumping along at that level. Now the latest owner, and it's gone through a number of owners, just declared bankruptcy, a hedge fund, declared that there was zero demand to be found anywhere for the product of that steel mill, and that the tin mill and rolling steel mill, and closed it down. So this is, to answer my question at the beginning, a dead economy which is about to be hit by a shockwave of a banking collapse from Europe, and you can look to the Obama administration's complete refusal to do anything Roosevelt-like, complete denial of anybody who wanted to reorganize the banks with Glass-Steagall, or anybody who wanted to create a real modern public works mission. It has created the mass disappearance of the workforce in the United States. I mean, worse than active unemployment, mass dropout and disappearance of the workforce. And that's the situation that we're in really right now.